Broadcasting live and around the world. From Cabana One, the only podcast that's all ball bearings. Your ultimate source for everything Fletch.
Moon River. Whew. Thank you, Doc. You ever serve time?
Laker Jim and his beat reporters will stop at nothing to make sure Fletch lives forever. They don't shower much. This is FletchCast.
Thank you, Sammy, and welcome everybody to the premiere week episode of FletchCast. And even though the movie's red carpet took place last week, you can still feel the pageantry and the excitement exuding from the West Hollywood Edition Hotel where it took place. You can still smell the celebrity. Smells like Bryan Cranston.
Well, because I didn't smell it. And it was a podcast. It wasn't TV.
But before we get any further, I'd like to introduce my co-hosts, two men who are so full of holes, they whistle while they walk. Jake and Big Bob. Boys, in the last 33 years, we've never been closer to a Fletch movie coming out. Now, I'm sure each of us have something very special planned for premiere night. Jake, what do you have planned this Friday?
Well, right now, I'm hoping on a Friday afternoon to see it in the movie theater. I have never seen a Fletch movie in the movie theater, so I will be there day one. We were lucky, I guess we can announce that we have seen it already. We were lucky enough to have a screener of it. That was very nice to see that ahead of time. But to see it on the big screen, that's what I'm going to be doing. What about you?
Well, getting to the movies is a little tough for me because we have young kids.
Right.
But at the same time, there's nothing more romantic than a Fletch movie. So we'll probably put them to bed early, pop open a couple bottles of Dom Perignon.
Right. And
she'll be asleep usually within the first 2 to 3 minutes of the movie. I'll make myself dinner.
Some lobster thermidor as well.
Then I'll proceed to watch it 2, 3, 4 times in a row after that. Bob, what do you got going on? And keep it tight because joining us in just a little bit is the director of Confess Fletch. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you know who he is. Greg Mottola will be joining us on the show. But go ahead. What do you got planned?
I got big plans. Going to the movies, but after, from 5 o'clock, I'll probably go. I wanted to go to a matinee, but Joan and Margaret were unavailable until the evening. They normally love matinees, but we're still going to get in the matinee price at 5 o'clock. Tickets are bought. And yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to get back to this story. Greg Mottola, welcome to FletchCast.
Hey, guys.
Hey, there he is.
Now, you are somebody that we have been anticipating speaking to since episode 1. And we finally got here. So let me be first to say thank you so much for everything you've done to befriend this podcast and give us little tidbits of information here and there. It meant the world to us. And to be speaking to you today, we are absolutely thrilled. But the question is, how are you feeling with Confess Fletch just a few days away?
Well, I'm a little nervous talking to you guys because you've lived this Fletch mania for so long. But like I said a second ago to Jim, he was an incredible resource for me using his website to find out more about the Fletchverse, because that's one of the first places I went for research.
Oh, wow.
In finding out the history of the books and the history of the almost Fletch movies and all that. I got a lot of good stuff from you. Thank you.
That makes me feel good.
You're a fantastic resource for anybody who's endeavoring to try and do Fletch.
That's very cool. Thank you. But ultimately, you have to be feeling good about the final result of the Fletch film that you guys made.
I am feeling good, but I think appropriately nervous because the original Fletch, in particular, looms large over lovers of comedy, lovers of Chevy, lovers of the books. And we, for better or worse, decided to go a slightly different way, which I like to believe is a little closer to the tone of the books. But we had to, we changed things from that too. So we did our own version. I guess this is my way of saying, for anyone who's mad that we made a Fletch movie without Chevy, other people can make Fletch movies too.
Sure.
I mean, look at how many of Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe novels got adapted.
Absolutely.
From Humphrey Bogart and Alan Ladd to James Garner and Elliot Gould have all played Philip Marlowe. There's probably between TV and movies about 15 actors. I think thinking about the movies that almost got made, they all didn't get made for their own reasons, but I do wonder how much the shadow of the original movie hangs over it. So Jon Hamm and I tried to break the curse, and maybe we'll be terribly punished for it. Hopefully not. So.
Well, the reviews so far are, pretty good, actually. I mean, like the early reviews are really, really good. From what I have read, it seems like there is that nice little balance. There's some winks and nods to the original, but kind of, like you said, kind of blazing your own path forward. And I think that's where, the direction that it needs to go. I really do.
Well, one way we were able to break the Fletch curse was to accept that we had to make this film in a pretty small scale, quickly. And that was daunting to me because, I don't know what the budget of the original Fletch was, but I'm sure it was commensurate to a comedy star, studio film of the period that they had. I bet they had more days than we did. I can't imagine they had fewer. And so, by nature, the scale of the movie is not gigantic. There was a pandemic going on that limited us in a lot of ways.
Right.
Luckily, I had this idea that when Fletch gets to the newsroom where his old friend Frank is now the editor of the Boston Sentinel, it's half empty because everyone's working from home.
I love that. Yeah.
Post-pandemic.
Yeah.
It also helped with our pandemic rules for how many extras you could have in a space and how much extras cost. I mean, we were trying to find every way to make this movie and get as much as we could on the screen for the amount we had. The cool thing was Miramax was like, here's the amount you have to make it for. Then we're going to leave you alone. And they really did. So for better or worse, they have. I've tried not to look at the reviews too much. I've noticed that some of the reviews that really don't like it, I feel, are people who are, they're not going to accept that it's not as much like the original, and that's fair enough. I mean, it's a taste thing. I love the original, but Jon and I said, Jon trying to do a Chevy impersonation is not going to work, and anyone out there, any Gen Zers who haven't seen the original, you should see it. And the sequel, they're great. The first is an absolute home run. The second is just tons of great laughs. And I hope we didn't besmirch the Fletch legacy.
Well, we were lucky enough to get a screener thanks to you, and we all really enjoyed the movie.
Thank God.
We are the biggest critics when it comes to Fletch. You either love Fletch because you're a Chevy Chase fan, or you love the character of Fletch. And if you love the character of Fletch, you're going to absolutely love this movie.
Well, one of the things I noticed because I have to confess, I hadn't read the books when I was younger. I had always heard of them. I heard they were great. I love detective novels. I love Chandler and Hammett and Elmore Leonard and a bunch of other people. And I love detective movies. That genre is one of my favorites. And I was like, I got to get around to those books. They're supposed to be fantastic, but I hadn't. And then Jon came to me one day and said, Miramax owns the rights to all of the Fletch books except for the first one. And they've approached me about making one. And he said, what they don't know is that when the first one came out, I immediately went to the library to find out something about the book it was based on. I saw in the credits based on a book. I wanted to get the book. Then I found out there were other books. So Jon went to Walden Books and stole whatever existing Fletch books were on the shelf. He shoplifted the rest of the Fletch books, whatever they were, how many had come out by 85, I guess that was, and loved them. And he saw, oh, I'm learning about how films work. You don't necessarily, when you're adapting something, you can change it, and in good ways or bad ways, or it's different. He saw the differences between the tone of the novels and the tone of Chevy's version. Now, one of the things I absolutely adore about Chevy's version is that he's kind of like all the Marx Brothers rolled into one when he comes into a room. He just befuddles people. He confuses them by being so absurd and yet straight-faced at the same time that they don't really know what's going on. He makes their brains freeze up, and that's how he gets over on them. He's just constantly fooling people, even though he's saying nonsense. Sometimes he's saying words that, are names that don't exist, as we all know.
Right.
And that chaos he creates, when I saw it as a young man, it was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen. And I love that. But when Jon told me about this, I immediately went and read like 5 or 6 of the books, and I loved them. And I did see, that's not quite what the character is in the books. I mean, he fools people, he lies, he uses fake names, and he, is foolish at times, and he's the smartest guy in the room, but maybe not quite as smart as he thinks he is. And so many things are baked into the DNA of the Chevy version, but there were differences. So Jon and I sat a long time to talk about what's another way to go about doing this, even though it runs the risk of pissing off people who love the original.
Where did you make the decision, or when did you make the decision to do Confess out of these novels? I mean, I love Confess. It is one of my favorites, between that and Fortune and the original, probably my 3 favorites. But why Confess?
Well, Jon said, read more than one, but Confess is the one I'm thinking we should do. And in fact, he already had a screenwriter, Zev Barrow, starting to work on Confess. But he said, it doesn't have to be Confess. We could change our minds. Miramax has got them all. But when I read it, I thought, well, what helps is Jon is obviously not the age that Fletch is in the novels. He's older. And it's interesting that Gregory McDonald decided in book 2 to already have Fletch be retired from investigative reporting. And he gets kind of sucked back into the world of solving, as in most Fletch books, 2 mysteries at once. He doesn't ever like to do anything simple, right. Both Fletch and Gregory McDonald. And I thought, well, that kind of makes sense that he's a guy coming out of a sort of retirement that kind of works with an older actor playing Fletch. And I thought the sort of, waspy world of old money in Boston was a really interesting contrast to the sunny sands of Santa Monica in the first book, in the first movie. That's so Southern California, and the movie just soaks up that Southern California feel. This would feel, quite different. And in my mind, I always, not that it really, we had a couple of references that we ended up not using, and I can let you guys in on those. But in my mind, I imagine the whole Alan Stanwyck story happened to our version of Fletch too. It's just, it was probably just a different year right. Than because of Jon's age. But anyway, Confess Fletch, I just thought it was so funny. The characters are so great. It's a side of Fletch. You're seeing some other things about him that you didn't see in the first book necessarily. And one thing I started to notice reading the books is that Fletch has a kind of real affection for oddballs and, people who are on the fringes or disenfranchised or just weird, as long as they're authentic. He might like a rich person if they're authentic. He likes authentic people, or at least fun people. He also dislikes assholes and phonies and bullies, and he's very happy to fuck with them. And I thought, this book has some of those characters. So what happened next was that I agreed with Jon. Zev, who's a very funny, good writer, was off working on a version. He gave us an outline. He changed more of the book than I expected. He was using not that much of the book at all. But, I wanted to let him write his version. So he went off and wrote it, and he was sending me scenes. And I thought, well, it's a little broader than Jon and I imagined, but it's, it's funny. He's writing funny stuff. When he finally turned it in, Jon and I felt like this is a great, hilarious script for Chevy, but it's not the book really. And it's not what he and I had been talking about. So I took some of Zev's innovations, like he put in scenes in Italy. He changed, and this is the biggest change, and we'll talk more length about it. Flynn, we weren't allowed to use.
Sure.
He created an African-American detective who had a female sidekick. I kind of reworked those characters completely, but I liked the basic premise of them. But he didn't use like the next door neighbor lady and turned into, the lush who was in love with the owner of the apartment where the murder was. And I turned her obviously into Annie Mumolo as the batshit insane neighbor.
She was great. Yeah, she was great in it.
He didn't have characters like that in it, and I thought, well, that's kind of a missed opportunity. I felt like there weren't enough suspects for the murder, and I knew some things, just bringing it to 2022, were not necessarily going to work. If you want, we could start talking about the differences between the book and the movie, because this sort of naturally leads to that.
The Flynn character is obviously something that's probably
that's the biggest one. I mean, when I first got involved, I said to Jon, how do we tackle Flynn? It's this amazing character. Their relationship is the heart of the book. And our producer told us we don't have the rights to Flynn. The estate has kept those rights separate with the hopes of someone someday doing Flynn series, and which would be amazing. And I was bummed, because I thought, this is, such a huge part of this book. It's a ton of the charm of the book is that relationship. But I do have to say, at the same time, as I was trying to get my head around Flynn, I thought it's a tricky thing to bring Flynn into 2021, because his whole backstory took place in World War II. So that would be, he'd have to be 100 years old or whatever. And the backstory, is amazing as it is, and how wonderful it is in the novel, it's a little harder to pull off in a movie, especially if you're trying to keep your movie to 90 minutes, because it isn't really telling the plot. It's one of those like great digressions. That whole Flynn chapter is such a wonderful, delightful digression. But it isn't really the story of the movie. It's its own thing. Mm-hmm. So not say it couldn't be done. It could be done. I think you'd have to make the movie 2 hours, and you'd have to figure out, the modern day version of Flynn. And my worry was, would he seem like, to people who don't know the book, like some kind of anachronistic Irish cop, like the ones you used to see in Bugs Bunny cartoons, like Irish cops, they, with accents, do they still exist? In old movies they do, but move it along.
But you were able to add a lot of Flynn's qualities to Monroe.
Absolutely.
Yes, but let's not lean into that too much, because I might get sued.
Good point.
No, I'm kidding.
But he is an inspector, and he is slow-mo, so he's not reluctant, but he's slow-mo. So there's
right, exactly. I was told, I used reluctant once, and they said, don't do that. And it's like, I thought, well, the great thing about it, and in fact, the biggest regret I have, is I forgot to write the line. Well, this will give too much away. There's a line that in a few weeks we'll talk about it.
Okay.
There's a Flynn story point that I did not underline, that in all of trying to make it work, I somehow slipped my mind, and only when the movie was over, I hit myself in the head. But yes, I did steal some of those qualities, because, even just the fact that Flynn had a newborn, and in my early passes on the script, I didn't do that much with it. I just sort of made him complain about not getting enough sleep. And Jon showed the script to Robert Carlock, who's the creator of 30 Rock. Very, very funny dude. And Jon's been on 30 Rock, and they're pals. And he just, gave me a few notes. And one of them was like, you should do more with that. That's a funny character thing. So like the idea of him being at work, not having any, childcare, and having his little infant strapped to his chest with the badge on the baby's butt, right, was all stuff that came out of that suggestion. And I thought, okay, that's different than Flynn, but the spirit of the warmth of the character, the intelligence of the character, and the fact that he doesn't just rush to judgment, which is not what I think Fletch would expect from a cop, because he's not the biggest lover of authority. The way I try to explain Fletch to people who don't know him that well, and the version we went after, is that he is on the side of right, but he thinks, institutions like the police and the justice system move too slowly, or flawed, often fail. So I'm just going to break some laws and lie to a bunch of people and solve this thing while there's time to catch the bad guy. It's a kind of value system, and it's delightful that he's also the kind of guy. And this I took directly from the book. The circumstances were slightly different, but the fact that he gets things wrong, he's not always right. Some of his theories that he's starting to become pretty certain about, he finds out are dead wrong. But he's not the kind of person who would like argue or be embarrassed or fight for his side of it. He would just shrug and say, okay, well, then let's move on and find the right answer. He's, his unflappability, I didn't put it in the movie, but there's the whole section where he's trying to help his editor write the story about an arson.
Right. Yeah.
And he develops this very specific theory about who the arsonist is, and he's 100% wrong about it.
Yes.
And it's just, I just something about that I loved so much. And then I thought, well, this also helps me a lot, because if I made a movie where Jon Hamm was 100% correct every second of the film, that would really be obnoxious.
Can't be handsome and infallible.
Yeah, we don't get to be Jon Hamm. It's like, oh, and you're right all the time too. Go fuck yourself. So anyway, the Flynn thing, yeah, that was bad news when I first heard that. So I tried to do my best to take some of the spirit of it. And obviously I changed the relationship with his underling. I thought about sticking to what was in the book. What was the name of the character, even though it wasn't
Grover.
Grover. I tried to, Grover, whose real name wasn't Grover. I thought about that, but Zev had written a really sort of hard-ass young female detective, and I'd change it into, the neophyte character who Fletch likes, but is going to, mess with the whole movie. I just thought that would be a fun runner to
She's
make
great
her
too. Yeah.
I'll tell you when we all, watched it and we all were like, okay, well, what did everybody think? We all loved Grizz. Grizz
was great.
stole the movie with her. I mean, she really is great. Yeah,
she's kind of the warmth of the movie in her own way. I mean, she's like you end up rooting for her, even though you want Fletch to do his Fletchy stuff, but you also want her to have a victory. And Aiden, the actress, did such a wonderful job.
Right. Yeah, not only her back and forth with Fletch the whole movie, but also her kind of comedic chemistry with Roy Wood Jr.
And I love Roy Wood, and Roy played it like he really approached this like a serious actor, not like a comic who's going to just try and improv his way through the whole part and be in a different movie. He really, he's very funny, but he's also very, contained. Right. As at least how I saw the character, and I felt he nailed that. So it was, that was a great combo to have.
So when we were talking about differences, and you mentioned earlier about in this world, the original movie kind of did exist. Is that why you decided to bring Frank over and replace the Jack Saunders character?
Yes, I think also, the fantasy, and I'm knocking on wood, is that we get to do another. Yeah. And I thought if we get to do another, because there are those two editors that appear in various books,
yes,
that we could merge them and make them one guy, and then get John Slattery, who I love.
He was hilarious. Oh my God.
Great shorthand with John. Yeah. I thought, well, if we can get them both in it, that's great. And if I get Slattery back, I'd be so thrilled. And so we just decided, well, they're probably not going to let us make all of them. So let's hope that they let us make two, and at least have one recurring character. So that was the thinking behind that. And the thinking behind Lucy Punch's character, who is the ex-wife of the guy who owns the apartment where a dead body is found, which is giving away nothing because it's the first minute of the film, is in the book. She's left her husband for another woman. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I think we're less accepting of gay female characters. The only concern was not being able to do justice to the character, because a movie is shorter, you can't give enough screen time, and it coming across a little bit like, Fletch actually ends up suspecting that character of being the murderer. And I thought, well, if we go that direction, does it seem a little unintentionally weird that he's having all these bad negative thoughts about a lesbian?
Right.
Will I botch it? It's basically what I was thinking. And I thought, it's a story. I mean, I love that McDonald wrote about people from all walks of life, and that he was very accepting of different sexualities. And
oh yes,
don't want to give the end away to one of his novels, but there's a huge surprise in one of them that something that I don't think anyone was writing about at that time. And so that was, I went back and forth with that idea, and I thought, well, if I'm going to take McDonald's idea that he likes to work in a little bit of social satire commentary into it, and it's not necessarily going to be the same 1970s things that he's talking about, but try and make it relevant to today. I had this idea that what if that character is this sort of influencer type, this sort of white privileged woman whose brand is beauty and elegance and, eating the best food and living your best life, all of things that require you to be super fucking rich, and has no sense of the disparity between her life and people who don't have money, because that's, I guess, a pet peeve of mine right. in the social media world.
Mine too.
And I thought, well, that'd be a fun thing to send up, because I had an idea for how Jon could fuck with her. Mm-hmm. And my plan in that scene was like, instead of just sort of leading her on so she'd make a fool of himself, I just thought he should just go in there and be even more shallow and awful than she is. And then she would really be confused by the fact that, like, oh, I mean, I'm terrible, but this guy's really bad. And that would really throw her off. Yeah. And Jon obviously had a lot of fun playing that scene. That's the reasoning behind changing that character, who is a great character in the novel. And that the scene in the novel where he interviews her under false pretenses is a great one.
Greg, how much access did you have to the original movie material, and how did you decide how much you wanted to weave in to sort of bridge the gap between your version and the original movies?
Well, first of all, because you guys are true believers, I'll let you in on the little homage moments to the original Fletch that we ended up not doing, and I'll tell you why. One was, of course, a reference to the Underhills. That was going to come in the first few minutes of the movie. And the Miramax lawyer told us you can't use that name because in the first novel, I think the name is mentioned in Karaoke Fletch. So we were basically allowed to say anything that was in any of the Fletch books, but except if it was only exclusively in the first one. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, in the first novel, the name was Underwood.
Yes.
And they changed it in the movies to Underhill. So it was like, shit, we can't do that. I really wanted to do that. Just as a way of, like, besides the Laker hat, obviously being, because that's something from the movie, not from the books. I wanted to, salute Chevy in the original and my own love for it. And the fact that movie ends talking about the Underhills, I wanted to start this one talking about. We couldn't do it. The other one is more ridiculous. When Fletch goes to the yacht club and there happens to be a clam bake going on, there's this great kind of swing band called the Hot Sardines, who I've seen live a bunch of times, and I asked them to play themselves in the movie. I had them, there was a moment where they're playing Moon River. And that was meant to be like, if you get it, if you really get the joke, that's for you. But then in post-production, we were talking about the fact that we were over budget on our music, and they said, will you please give up Moon River because it costs too much? And so,
really?
Yeah, so that joke had to go. Unfortunately, that one makes me sad because I really wanted that for the
damn you Miramax
for the lovers of the first movie, because it was such a stupid way to reference it by actually playing the song.
Now, one thing we were all kind of holding our breath for was the theme. Was that ever a possibility to be able to use the Fletch's Harold Faltermeyer theme?
We explored the idea of one of Kyle MacLachlan plays a character. He's an art dealer named Haran who's into EDM, electronic dance music, and we explored the idea of doing an EDM version of the Fletch theme for him to be dancing to. Once again, that fell by the wayside of budget, and the idea of scoring the whole movie, or trying to contact Harold Faltermeyer or work with a composer who would work with him sort of the way they did the new Top Gun. Mm-hmm. I mean, they used a lot of his score and then they used a lot of new score and adapted of his stuff. The reason ultimately we decided not to try too hard for that, and the same reason we didn't beg Chevy to be in it, is that we thought we should just try to do our own thing and not rest on the laurels of another movie. That score is fantastic. It's obviously very period specific. there's part of me that wishes I actually just experimented and tried cutting to it to see what it felt like. I should have done that. But I just felt like I didn't want it to turn too much into a nostalgia thing, because I sometimes am disappointed when I watch something that's meant to evoke, remake of something from the 80s. And it's like, well, the magic isn't there. It's not this, it's a different animal. And then you're sort of stuck. You're sort of neither fish nor fowl. You're neither the first movie nor are you your own new thing. Mm-hmm. I think the example I use is the fact that Humphrey Bogart played Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep in the 40s, and 27 years later, Elliot Gould played Philip Marlowe in The Long Goodbye, and that's 27 years apart. I mean, the world changed faster back then. Fletch, the original Fletch, 37 years ago. First of all, sadly, there are young people who don't know the original Fletch, and if they're listening, they should watch it. I repeat, but you never say never. You never know. Moon River or the original Faltermeyer score may appear in the sequel if they let us make one, because I don't mind Easter eggs. I just start to get frustrated when movies have too many Easter eggs, when it's just too much fan service.
All right, there's still hope.
The Coming to America sequel was almost like overkill with Easter eggs. So there was a balance that we talked about going into this movie. One of the things that we were talking about, is such a big part of the original movies was the over narration that Chevy did in the Fletch character of all of his, everything that was going to happen in the movie. He would talk about it. Was that considered at all for this, or did you decide more or less to go a different way with your Fletch version?
Well, I read an interview with Chevy from God knows when, where he talked about basically the narration was to help shorten the film. They didn't plan on doing narration, but the movie was too long and they wanted to get it down to a nice crisp 95 minutes comedy length. And so in cutting scenes out, and I know you guys are well aware of the material that's been cut out and how often people ask you, when am I going to get to see it? Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, we don't get to see it. But so that's my understanding, is that was to help tell the story with the missing pieces gone. And when I felt the early cut of Fletch felt too long, we discussed, okay, did we fix this by using voiceover? And it is a classic, detective story, film noir technique, which is part of the charm in the original Fletch. But I thought, once again, to keep it feeling our own thing, if we can get it to a satisfying length and not feel like it's overstaying its welcome, without it, let's try. Sometimes voiceover feels like a crutch. I love it in the original Fletch. It's funny voiceover. It gives the ending, the ending. It's the last big smile you have leaving the theater. But we ultimately, we thought about it. I even wrote a little bit, and I thought, should I call Andrew Bergman to see if he can help me with this? That was the reason, ultimately.
What happened with the Laker hat in the trailer?
No one even told me that they were going to blur it out. This is directors don't get any respect anymore. I see the trailer and it's like, what? And I guess it has to be some kind of like, it would have cost more. We got the rights to use it in the movie, but they somehow didn't clear to use it in the trailer or commercials. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me, but that's what happened. And that's why there's a blurred out bit on the driver's license. At the 11th hour, someone said, the clearance department said the number on the driver's license belongs to a real person. It was just accidental. Yeah. And so we fixed it in the final print that people will see, but they discovered it the day before the trailer was it was a couple of days, and they, as I was talking to you, Jake, about it being delayed forever and ever and ever. And it's, it's part of it is, this is the reality for me, at least, of making a small, medium, small comedy in the system at this moment in time where film distribution exhibition is really kind of, a shit show. I mean, no one really knows what works anymore, except for throwing a shitload of money at a tentpole film that's got a built-in audience. And other than that, it's all, it's like the kind of sleeper movies now are Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is an A24 movie, independent distributor. People, and they do a great job with their limited resources selling a film. And I could tell that, we also, this film, we could have aimed more at a younger audience, put in more sex jokes. I'm certainly not averse to them. They put a roof over my head, but it just didn't feel right. I mean, a little bit is like, the world's a little more prudish than it was when Superbad came out, or when Confess Fletch was written. There's obviously more sex in the book than there is in our movie. But we kind of skewed this toward an adult audience because we want to make a really dialogue-driven character film, more of a comedy of manners, as I feel when I read the books. I mean, one of the big differences between the approach I took versus the original movies, in the original movie, basically everyone's a straight man to Chevy. I endeavored to cast funny people and let them be funny in addition to Jon. Sometimes Jon is the straight man in a moment, and sometimes his reactions are what's funny. And I believe Jon's very funny throughout the movie, but it is a different way at it. And that's something that I felt in reading the book. I mean, certainly the Countess is a funny, crazy character in the book. The next door neighbor, who's a lush, that Andy Mumalo's character is the replacement for, she has some very funny moments. She's sadder in the book. It's a little more emotional. I even think in my early drafts, I sort of attempted that, and there just didn't seem to be space in the real estate for that in the movie. But it's one of the, I guess I feel like if I get to do another one of these, I'm hoping I'll have a little more time, a little more money. It'll be probably a little longer, probably a little richer. And this was a hope that we could break the curse.
Well, you kind of set it up for fortune there at the end when you mentioned Walter March. If doing another one, that would probably be the one you would do.
Yeah, in some interviews, people have asked me which one would I do, and I haven't told them. And I thought this is the one exclusive I'd give you guys. Fletcher's Fortune is the one. Yeah, that's the one I would love to adapt. And the idea of putting Fletch in the middle of a lot of media people, some kind of journalism conference, given the age we live in and the absolute insanity of our culture and of all forms of media are going a little nuts too. I just thought this is a great place for satire and letting Fletch loose to do his thing. That's my hope, that I get to write that one.
And that's a great opportunity for 3 podcasters to be an Easter egg in the background of that movie as well.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, at the convention. Yes.
I would like to get Gregory's sons in there too. They would be good luck charms.
Yeah.
Now, Greg, you were able to get Larry into the movie. Now, what restrictions did you have regarding a character that was created for the movie?
I think that one might have slipped past legal. So,
nice.
So hopefully.
Well, you sort of made her a different character, just named Larry.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's a friend, and she's, we wanted to make it a little more fun for her. So we let her be Larry, but
Larry's a very common female name.
Well, exactly. And it's then the great tradition of women with male names in many of his books.
That's true.
We got Andy, Larry, Bobby, Freddie.
Freddie is a big character, and yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier about Chevy. I mean, was there any really serious discussions about a cameo or anything?
It was, what's ironic is my first little movie I made, my indie film I made in the 90s was called The Day Trippers. And after that, I got my foot in the door. Mm-hmm. And it was very helpful. And I wrote a script that I got set up at Sony Pictures, and I was thrilled. I'm going to make for them, a small film, but for me, a huge film. We made Day Trippers for like $80,000 and there I was going to do like a $10 million movie at Sony. It was going to star John Cusack, Steve Zahn, and Chevy Chase. I did table reads with Chevy. I hung out with Chevy. I got notes from Chevy. I I was in pre-production. They gave us a green light. It was about an intervention in the south of France, like a group of old friends who find out that the sort of ringleader of their college group it's sort of Big Chill with an intervention, is turned into, instead of their friend dying, he's just John Cusack was going to play this guy who'd gone off the deep end, and they all go to try and save him, and everything goes sideways. And Chevy was playing an uncle who's one of the reasons everything goes sideways. And he really liked the script, and we really got along, and I was so excited. Then Sony just decided one day, you know what, this movie's a little dark and a little small. We're going to kill it. Yeah. And I tried to get set up elsewhere. I couldn't. In my contact with Chevy, I never got to talk to him again. But I had nothing, I grew up loving him. I watched the first episode of SNL the day it aired. My parents somehow let me. He was a huge hero to me, and I loved all those films. And Fletch, like many, was my favorite Chevy Chase film. So it was very tempting to ask him to be in it. The problem was I just didn't feel like we had a part kind of good enough for him. I didn't want to just sort of trot him out to say, "Hey, look, we're Chevy Chase. We all love him," and and sort of stop the movie for that. If I really thought there was something that was worthy of the cameo, I probably would have asked him. I don't know. Who knows what he would have said. Right. I hope he doesn't hate us for touching something that I know he loves. And especially because you never know, I might think of something to ask him to do in the next one. So, once again, it was kind of like fan service or not do it yet. So we decided not to ask him.
It's got to be a part that's not distracting, where as you see him, that's all you can think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it needed to be meaty enough so he could actually have a scene and become a character and not just pop up, driving a boat or something. It's like it's
like the Uber driver or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's
right. Exactly. 5 stars. 5 stars.
That was John's.
5 stars. 5 stars.
That's it's like there are definitely movies, and I don't want to put down anyone else's work, but there are definitely movies that I feel like, it's that cameo is sort of distracting or sort of makes me sad because it makes me just want to watch the original. And I'm like, well, don't leave in the middle to go watch Fletch. Finish this one and then go watch Fletch. So anyway, that was the thinking. It was no diss on Chevy whatsoever. People say, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that there's been talk on the internet that he can be difficult. I don't give a shit about that. I love the guy. I love his work. He was great to me. The little bit of time I spent with him. And it was a heartbreak I didn't get to make a movie with him in 1999.
Yeah.
There's some dialogue that it is nice that you have a little wink to the original there in the boat scene at the end of the movie, because it's basically line for line the dialogue there at the end of the original. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
Well, we decided the denouement in the novel, and it didn't bother me reading the book. I kind of liked it in the book. You basically the whole mystery gets solved it's told to you in a conversation between Flynn and Fletch. Doesn't happen on the page.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's great in a book and it's ballsy. But if I did that in the movie, people would, I think, not be happy. So when I started to figure out, well, what is the ending then? We ended up in a scene that had some similarities to the end of the first Fletch. And I thought, well, I didn't set out to make it that way. It's just the pieces fell together. And I thought, oh, it's not, has some similarities. So then John and I talked about it, and it was actually John suggesting, so what about right here if we use that line from the film? And I thought, oh, that's great. We love the movie. There's no like, it bugged me. Like, I love Tim Burton, but when he said he was making a new Willy Wonka movie and he was putting down the original, so he never liked it, I was like, come on, man, you have to say that.
Yeah, right.
We love Gene Wilder. Yeah. Come on. It's like, I know yours will be like really different, and that's cool too. But I have no desire to diss Fletch. It's a kick-ass movie.
Jon Hamm had said in an interview that Bill Hader I guess was brought on to maybe just like read over the script or come up with some ideas or whatever. He said that he actually came up with a brilliant idea for some part of the ending that I guess you guys used. Is that something you can?
That is absolutely true. And it's, and I can't talk about it too much without giving away anything, but yes, Bill had to take Bill, old friend of mine and John, and we asked him to read it and give notes. And he had basically this one note. He said in this one scene, what if, and it just was turning it slightly, but it made it really funny in a great way and fit perfectly. And so I gladly stole that idea from Bill. I've worked with comedy people, and I see that the way they work is they're constantly showing stuff to their peers, and if their peer comes up with something funny, they have no guilt taking it and claiming ownership. Like when Judd Apatow does table reads of screenplays, he invites all the best comedy writers in LA to come and watch, and then they sit around and talk and pitch ideas. And that's kind of a comedy thing. I mean, it's a way of kicking the tires or something. And the truth is you end up discarding. We did it on Superbad. We ended up discarding 95% of the suggestions, but the 5% we kept were good ones. So we did a similar kind of thing we did a little round table with funny people we know. I invited a writer I know from the TV show Dave, Saladin Patterson, who's a great African-American comic. We invited Robert Carlock and Paula Pell, who are 30 Rock writers. Who else was in that panel?
Aubrey Plaza, or no?
Aubrey and Pat Oswalt did an early table read for us via Zoom, and we got some help from them. And then, it was Andy Ciara, who I'm working with on a TV version of Adventureland. Andy wrote Palm Springs, which was a really hilarious movie that I bet you guys saw on Hulu.
I did see it. It was great. Yeah.
Very funny.
So it was a real murderer's row of funny people. And, they pitched a lot of jokes, and a lot of them were like one-liners and things like that's funny, but it not really necessary to the scene. I didn't want the script to get super fat. I did, for whatever reason, I wanted this movie to be pretty tight. But then occasionally people would suggest an idea that would, like I had said earlier, where Robert Carlock suggested the idea of lean more into Morris's baby thing and being exhausted all the time and what it's like to be a new parent. And I've been there. I've got 3 kids, so I know I can write that. So it was, stuff like that is, and I was writing, working up to now, everything I've written has pretty much been kind of personal, from aspects of my life. And that was super helpful, but it's also fun when you're doing it, you're the director and the writer, because you also get to say no and not use stuff you don't want to use. Like there's always a pressure just to jam in everything, and have a million alts to every line, but you can kind of lose the thread of the scene sometimes that way. So we found a balance. And also, Andy Mumolo, being who she is, she suggested the line where she's talking about how she inherited her apartment from her ex-husband. And then she says, well, he's not really my ex. He died on the toilet, but nobody wants to hear that. Yeah. That's Annie. I mean, she's a great comedy writer. She co-wrote Bridesmaids. And I thought, yep, we're using that.
We've had this discussion, like we've said to each other, like, what do we do if we hate it? Like, what do we say? Luckily we did not have to cross that bridge.
I really thought I'd end up having to write you guys a long apology. But it's like my feeling is, someone else could decide to do other versions of this, just like Philip Marlowe. I mean, down the line, why shouldn't Kevin Smith get to make his version someday? Anyway, sorry, Bob, I interrupted.
No. I was going to say, definitely. Speaking of crossing bridges, it's been my theory now. You seem like the kind of person that doesn't do things by accident. We see one scene, without giving too much away, where Grizz is driving in New Jersey, and we're following her GPS, and it seems like her current position is the exact town where Laker Jim and I grew up in, Carteret, New Jersey, where she's currently at. I did the latitude longitude, even with Staten Island. It's right there now. I'm going to assume that was intentional.
Oh yeah.
or an Easter egg thrown at us, right?
Yeah, that's like a Passover egg. That's how rare that is.
All right, well, we'll put it on IMDb as credit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like Jake, were you the one who caught the birthday on the driver's license?
Actually, LJ and I found that together when we were breaking down the trailer.
Really nice.
I mean, like, that's a nice wink. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was really sweet.
Well, to anyone who hasn't read the books, they're such a fucking joy.
They are.
And they feel as modern as anything. I mean, he really obviously loved Chandler and Hammett and like, and I love people like Elmore Leonard, like I said before, but he found his own way into this kind of storytelling, his own tone, that is unique and delightful. And the books are not all exactly the same. They have different styles somewhat, or different approaches. They all have some interesting thing to say about society. I mean, I'm sure you've heard a million times the quote of his about why he likes the genre of mystery, because it's so pedestrian. You can sneak in all this sort of social criticism. Obviously, as a human being, he was very involved in just causes for justice. So we obviously had a very strong feeling about that. And you feel it in the books, but he's also, a devilish, hilarious guy.
He was. And I can tell you right now that he would be very, very satisfied and very happy with how it turned out. I know for certain he would be very happy with it.
In some metaphysical universe, I hope that's true. That's very nice of you to say. I'll take it. I really respect the guy a lot.
We are kind of, I guess, ignorant when it comes to the film industry. When it comes to a movie being released, and I know there's probably a certain number you have to hit before a sequel is green-lighted. I mean, is that something that you're privy to? Do you know about that? Is that something you are watching?
Well, I think
or
because
how does that work?
All bets are off now in film distribution, and we're getting this sort of hybrid release. Instead of going straight to streaming or getting a traditional release, I think we're at about 450 theaters starting Friday. We're on demand the same day. Even that couldn't have happened 2 years ago. Up to 2 years ago, the major chains, at least AMC, Regal, and what other one? Cinemark, maybe. They wouldn't take a movie that was being released on demand the same day. They wanted to keep the window of 90 days that they've always had before a movie can be seen on a TV screen or anywhere else but on a theater screen. And the pandemic kind of, broke everybody. It broke the exhibitors, it broke the business, and everything changed. So Paramount is very decidedly, and probably sadly, wisely, not spending a lot of money on promoting this movie. They want it to be a word of mouth thing and hope that people hear about it, but they're not expecting, any kind of first weekend bonanza. To get those, you really have to spend millions upon millions of dollars. Even though Superbad was a real surprise to me, Sony really got behind it and spent a lot of money promoting that movie once they said, "Oh, I think we have a hit." So it's not so much that I think they don't like the movie. I think they just say, "Well, this kind of skews adult, and a lot of young people don't know who Fletch is, and it's not IP that is known by everybody, and it's not a super broad, dirty comedy, so it fits more on streaming, but it's good enough to be in the theater for a little bit." So who knows? I don't know. Once it gets to Showtime, I don't know what metric will make them feel like, oh, that was in all its various forms worth doing. I mean, I guess, when it's on Showtime, you'll also be able to rent it. The in-demand price is high, because for the first month they charge a premium. Then eventually, I think when it's on Showtime, you can get it on iTunes or wherever for what most movies cost to rent. So I guess they'll add up those numbers and say, oh, that was good, and it brought some eyeballs to Showtime or whatever. But I don't, that's a big complaint about Netflix. Nobody seems to know where they make their money, like the world of residuals for people like me and actors and writers is dried up in a big way. Which is the reason most of us have to just go from job to job to job now, because back in the old days, if you had a show on something on HBO or on a network, you would get very nice residuals if they aired it a lot. Now with Netflix, it's like, who knows how many times people have pressed the play button? They don't share that information anymore. So it's weird. It's really weird. I don't know why some things they'll make $1 million of. I mean, Netflix is sort of in the business of doing a lot of like tween things that are kind of cheaper to make and kids eat them up. And I get it. It's a smart business model, but I don't know. Then when they spend a couple $100 million on a giant film and don't put it into theaters, I guess they're selling subscriptions enough that way. I don't know that anyone knows anything anymore.
Greg, they say that you need 3 miracles to be ordained a saint. And as far as we're concerned, after 33 years, getting a Fletch movie off the ground was nothing short of a miracle.
Thank you. That's very nice of you, Jim.
God, we admire you.
The standards are very low now for miracles. Greg, I know you got to go, but thank you so much for your time. We'll be watching it on demand. We'll be in the theaters on Friday, September 16th. And we look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, I'll gladly come back if you guys want to talk again while the movie's making its way through various media. And we could talk about the Apple Watch version of the film. And I really appreciate you guys. I'm so glad you didn't hate it. And hopefully if you give it a second viewing, you'll see new things in it that you like. But I love that you guys love the movie and the book so much, because it's a great character. It's a great creation, what Gregory McDonald did. And also what Michael Ritchie and Andrew Bergman and Chevy Chase did are all wonderful bits of American artistry.
Yeah, perfect. All right, Greg, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, guys. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Bob.
What an incredibly nice guy. Really good dude.
He's just as open and honest and nice as he is. He's been very charitable towards us, giving us information. And he did the exact same thing today, and you got to appreciate that. I can't wait to talk to him again.
I think the listeners really learned a lot, as we did. I think we got a really in-depth, behind-the-scenes look of how the movie was made. I think a lot of my questions, I'm sure yours as well, I think a lot of my questions were answered as far as differences between the book and the movie, what was in, what was out, those callbacks to the original. So yeah, I learned a lot, and I think, at least I hope that who's ever listening has as well.
You see, kids, I think what we learned today is that movie makers and directors just can't wave a magic wand and insert anything and everything into their movie that you can possibly dream of. The original is owned by another company. There are laws and lawyers and people out there protecting the intellectual property of the other films. So, that being said, I really think they did an excellent job paying fan service to the character of Fletch, fans of the movie, and lovers of the book.
I would hope that those that may be a little apprehensive about seeing it will maybe push them over the edge to actually get them to see it. Maybe those really Fletch Chevy diehards, just with the reviews and just people talking about how great Hamm's performances will maybe encourage them to go and see it.
I think that the one thing Hamm proved in this whole thing is that he is definitely reliable for a Fletch franchise. I think that this needs to be a trilogy. I think that this needs to be at least 3 movies in total.
A Fletchverse would be great. But as of Friday, we really can say Fletch lives.
Amen, brother.
Without a doubt.
I'd once again like to thank Greg Mottola for his time. Confess Fletch this Friday, limited theaters, so you might have to search for it, but you'll find it. Also available on demand. There's no excuse. Go out and see Confess Fletch this weekend and give us a call on the hotline. Let us know what you think. For Jake and Bob and Greg Mottola, I'm Laker Jim. It's time to confess Fletch. See ya.
See ya.
Great job, as always. Better.